You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamamia podcast.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl from Sydney who wanted to be a ballerina. She'd watched dances all her life on TV and on the Wiggles, but then she got really badly injured.
I guess from that point on, I never really had any flexibility, and I still don't.
And that dream went out the window. So she went in search of something more. And little did she know that something more would land her as one of the most recognised children's entertainers in the country and, in fact, the world.
Hi, I'm Anthony.
I'm Simon.
I'm Lucky.
I'm Emma, and we're
The Wiggles.
From Mamamia, you're listening to No Filter, a podcast where people from all walks of life tell their wiggly stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. My name is Mia Friedman, and today I'm joined by Emma Watkins, also known as Emma Wiggle, and her dog Rumi, who you might hear in the background throughout this interview. He's very, very needy.
My dog. Shh. This is terrible.
If you have kids or are adjacent to kids, you'll know that in 2012, the Wiggles got some new team members, and one of those was Emma. She became the first ever female to join the Wiggles and wear the yellow turtleneck, and since that moment, she's become the absolute Mick Jagger rock star equivalent of the band. She dances, she sings, and she's incredibly open about her life, including marrying one of her fellow Wiggles, getting a divorce, having fertility problems. And on this episode of No Filter, we talk about everything. Here's my chat with Emma Wiggle Watkins. You got a call to audition for a role of a dancing fairy in the Wiggles.
Yes.
You'd grown up watching the Wiggles.
Yes.
And it sounded like a good role. Did you get it straight away or did you have to do callbacks?
I had auditioned for the Wiggles previously to this particular audition and didn't make it through, but I'd been there for the whole day, so I felt like that was a good day of auditions. You know, I'd been through a few rounds and I got to the point where I sang Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and I was like, wow, that's so good. But no, I wasn't successful that day. But then this time the notice came up for a ballet dancing fairy, but it was very specific, whereas last time it was more of a general call. So who knows what they were looking for at the time. And this role, they gave us the video of the dancing before it started, the music. Sorry, that is my dog. It just really wants to play with the ball. And I was surprised that the audition was so prepared in that you didn't have to learn it on the spot, which is most of the audition reason. Generally, they want people to come to an audition and then put you on the spot and teach you a combination to see how quickly you can pick it up. And that was always something that I loved about auditions because I love picking up choreography and I love visual movement. So I was always inspired by that. And this felt like it was taking that away. And I thought, oh no, we're all going to be prepared. The stakes are even higher. But most of the people there, you know, were all people that were either from my school or that I knew them. And so it was just another audition to me at the time, except the fact that it was a fairy. I was like, oh, that's very me. I have curly hair. I look a bit like a fairy. Let's see if we can go for this.
You've got fairy energy.
I was trying that vibe. And really it was at the end of the audition. Normally in other auditions, particularly for Disney, they ask you if you can do acrobatics, of which I am definitely not good at. They asked people if they had any other skills like acrobatics, and I was like, oh, I really can't say that I have acrobatic skills. But one of the girls on the panel that was already in the show, she was an Irish dancer and remembered me from competitions, and she's like, but you Irish dance, don't you? I was like, oh yeah. And I never really considered it to be a special skill. And so the panel asked me to do a little bit of a step around the room, and I got the role. So that helped me.
Because I remember watching the Wiggles in the early days, and there is quite a bit of Celtic Irish dancing.
The guys, especially, you know, from the Field family, have a huge Irish, you know, heritage, and a lot of their friends and musical influences at the time were in Celtic music, not just here in Australia, but over in Ireland and in America. And so a lot of that early Wiggles music to me feels nostalgic when I hear the accordion. And so if I hear that sound, I'm like, I know that's like classic Wiggles era. That's the era that I grew up on. And maybe that's why I feel a connection to that music. It feels full circle in a way because I had seen Irish dancing for the first time on the Wiggle show, and apparently my mum just said I was obsessive over watching the Irish dancing as part of the show, and the way that, the children, they were like jumping around, because they had a lot of different performers at that point, joining their videos. And it's so nice to see children as part of the original early videos, some of them that we're still friends with now or ended up working for us, or, what an amazing journey.
After you were the fairy, you got a promotion to being a wiggly dancer and you went on the road. How big is the company that goes on the road? Because obviously people know the 4 main Wiggles, but what's the machine that is around it? What does touring look like?
It's not that big, or it's not as big as people expect it to be, especially in my last 12 years. It hasn't been as big as it used to be. So, when the Wiggles were in their prime time, they would perform at the Macy's Day Parade, huge events. And you can see videos and photos of the cast where there might have been maybe 10 or 12 extra dancers, and some of the crew would be up to about 7 to 10 people. But essentially it's quite small, compared to huge acts like Taylor Swift. We happened to be in the same city as her one time. She had 22 trucks and we had 1. Most of us have multiple skills and experience in other areas. So even when I first started on the Dorothy the Dinosaur show, we would also be helping out pack up the set, set up the merch stand. So you're constantly doing multiple things. You're not just a dancer, or you're not just a wiggle, or you're not just a sound person, everyone's kind of pitching in. It's more of a circus atmosphere.
The Cinderella story of you being asked to become a wiggle.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Well, I was a wiggly dancer on the road, and we were doing a show actually at the Enmore Theatre in Sydney. I think it was around about April that particular year. And I had been with the Wiggles only for a few months, almost a year, on that particular show. And Anthony just pulled me aside just before the show, and he said, I have something to tell you, and, I've got to let you know that the 3 other original Wiggles, they're going to retire at the end of the year. And I was so upset because I felt like I'd only just got onto the show and I got into the groove of it. I'd been touring for that last year with the company, and it just felt like the best. And I was like, oh, that's sad.
Did you assume that the band was going to just finish?
Yeah. Even though he'd said about the 3, I didn't even think twice that meant that he was staying. Like, I didn't process anything, and it was a lot to take in. I thought that it was a chat about losing my job. I thought he was just going through, the cast and, letting us know that, in 8 months' time that this was going to happen. And he said, but I wanted to tell you because we're going to choose Lockie as the new Purple Wiggle. And Lockie and I had known each other for about a year and a half. We were best of friends. I was like, this is amazing. And I was like, you don't have to tell me about it. So I was confused. I was like, why are you telling me? He's like, I think you should come with me to tell him. And I was like, well, it's your news. It's not my news, but, I can if you want. And he's like, well, actually, we wanted to offer you a role as a Wiggle as well. And I was like, what? And at that point, it was just very confusing. And I thought it was a joke. And he's like, no, we're being serious. I'm like, oh, okay. Because normally they play jokes all the time. So I would just, it just didn't seem like a very,
actually, you're unemployed. Isn't that funny?
My head obviously was thinking that, that was the end for the group.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking about Lockie, and then I was excited, and then it was like, oh no, but you too. And I was like, what? So it was just like about 20 minutes of, I was so elated, but I didn't know what to do with the information. I was told it was confidential, and, would I like to come and tell Lockie? And then I went and told Lockie, and then he was looking at me and he's like, why are you here? I was like, oh, we're going to be here together. So, it was obviously we were excited. And I think that was a special day. Like, I'm still remembering what it was like to go and see Lockie and tell him. But at that point, we couldn't tell anybody. So we could only talk about it together. But thankfully, we had each other because we were like little jelly beans, like inside a pot. Like, how are we going to contain this kind of excitement? But for us, we thought we were being announced at the end of the year. And the retirement of the other 3 Wiggles was going to be announced within a month of us talking about it from that day. So I kind of relaxed because firstly I was very worried. I was like, oh, I don't sing. He's like, don't worry about it. Lockie's singer, Simon's singer. It's going to be a different dynamic. And I was like, okay, great. I was like, I'm still concerned because I just don't feel like I'm ready. And obviously I had that lady in my head saying, you're undercooked with your singing and you need to really work on it.
I wonder if any of the boys said the same thing.
I don't know.
Maybe I can't do it. Maybe I can't dance well enough. Are you sure you want to pick me?
I'm still teaching them to point their toes. I mean, most of them have had dance training, and sometimes it shines through. But, sorry about my dog.
That's all right. So you were doubting yourself?
Because I'd been on the road too and I'd seen Greg and Sam perform in the role, I was like, this is huge. And to be on the road at that time with Greg, I was like, how can I uphold this legacy? Somebody that I've always loved watching, any of the original guys for that matter. We'd been so lucky to tour with them for that year, essentially. And so at that point, I thought, okay, that's great. I've got 8 months to prepare myself. And then 2 weeks from this chat that we'd had at the back of Enmore Theatre, we were told that we were going to be announced as the new lineup on the same day as the announcing of the retirement. And that's kind of when we went into panic. Wow. Because I was like, oh, I'm not ready. I want to do the best job that I can. And at that stage, I hadn't really had that much experience singing on a microphone or recording anything. And so, I was panicked at that time. I was happy, but I was super panicked because I wanted to do a good job.
I always think about potential presidential candidates before they run. They're interviewed by their own people and they're asked if there's anything in their past that's likely to come up. Now, I imagine those considerations would have also been relevant for choosing New Wiggles. Did they do any due diligence on you? Did they look into your past to see if you had any skeletons or a sex tape or anything that could come out and be incredibly awkward?
Well, I guess what was strange about the whole concept was that we didn't know that we were being looked at. So for us, it didn't feel like I'd ever auditioned for the role, but I'd obviously been watched over a period of a year and a half. And I guess we were picked based on them knowing us as performers and us knowing what the tour was like. Touring on the road for that many months in the year is a huge job. And, we already toured together. I already knew Simon. I was touring with Simon for a year and I knew Lockie for over a year and we toured together. So they were looking for, I'm guessing, not that I was the panel at the time, but, they were looking for people that knew the Wiggly lifestyle and could come on the road and tour and were, familiar with our meet and greet situation and meeting children and children that have additional needs. And so that was a huge part of the process, I can imagine, because we were heavily involved in meet and greets and taking photos of the original Wiggles with children before the shows. And so that was a big role for us at that time.
The times that I've seen the Wiggles have been at enormous, almost stadium-style venues like the Entertainment Centre where there were tens of thousands of people. A few years ago, we were touring for Mamamia Out Loud Live, which is our podcast, and we were in this small kind of hall in Adelaide and we were talking to the people who ran the hall and they said, oh, yeah, the Wiggles were here last weekend. And I went, what do you mean the Wiggles were here? So this was during that time that you'd lost the 3 OG members and it was you, Simon and Lockie. It's like you had to start again, didn't you?
Yeah. Essentially, we were a new band. This is kind of why I say I felt panicked when I was asked to be a Wiggle, because we knew what big reputation there was for the band. It's not like starting a group or a band where you get to find that journey together. You start from the bottom up and you might grow and, who knows what that kind of popularity might be. We were already jumping into a group that was popular. So the 3 of us were like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? How do we upkeep this music and this nostalgic, historic kind of group to continue for years to come? We didn't want children to be disappointed. But yes, we did a grassroots tour of Australia. It was about 8 months and we tried to go to every town, every single town
It had never occurred to me that there would have been a backlash, but there was, wasn't there?
Oh, yeah. And I think initially for me, it was really being female. So that was really the initial backlash that I received. Oh, the Aboriginal Wiggles should be male. Like, you're ruining the Wiggles.
Who said
And
that to you?
So many people. I mean, social media opens yourself up for so many different kinds of comments. But, I could understand in a way because I used to watch the Wiggles. So I was trying to put myself into people's shoes, like, yeah, look, I get it. And those particular people that were writing weren't necessarily the current audience. They're not the 3-year-olds. So they want to protect their own childhood and they feel like they need to protect that memory of the Wiggles for themselves. And that's actually a beautiful thing. That worry actually ended up going away after a couple of years. And once we were able to prove ourselves that we were here to continue the music for everybody, then everyone relaxed. But it did take a long time.
How did you go from being a bit of a pariah, an interloper in a skirt, to being, as Anthony describes you, the Elvis of the group or the rock star or the Mick Jagger of the group, we should say, the Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones? How did that happen?
I think initially, and even though I say like being a female was one of the first contentious kinds of topics, being a female in this group that had always been male, then it was like, oh, hang on, she's the only girl. That's nice. And so all these new elements of, femininity then ended up coming back into the group. Not that they weren't there before, but in some ways they weren't as obvious maybe as it was when I was there. And yeah, I got a lot of flack for wearing a skirt and a bow and all the rest of it. But that costume ended up being my decision because I really wanted to wear a swishy skirt. That was kind of the brief. I was like, I think it would be nice to have like a skirt that I can dance in. And so I was able to put forward suggestions so that I felt comfortable. And I don't even own a pair of jeans. I've never owned a pair of jeans, just not a pant kind of person. I just don't tend to wear pants. So it was totally natural. It wasn't even thought about. Even with, the original Wiggles talking about what I would be wearing, it was like, oh yeah, well, so you'll wear a skirt because I would always wear a skirt on the tour. So it didn't feel weird to me, but I know later down the track, a stereotype became very apparent as part of the way that we definitely feel that we have a responsibility to represent different occupations and, different setups and scenarios for children. That becomes something that gets very heavily weighed upon. But it's changed throughout the decade. It's just been so interesting.
I'm Mia Friedman and you're listening to No Filter with Emma Wiggle. When did you and Lockie start dating?
It must have been around 2015, maybe.
So it was after you were both Wiggles. You'd known each other for a long time, but it was after you became Wiggles. So we've got a couple of people at Mamamia who date, and before they sort of hooked up, they had to have a really deep discussion really about what the potential consequences would be if it went wrong on their careers. Is that something that you and Lockie worked out and thought about?
Yeah. And for us, it was, again, we were kind of felt that we were starting this new group and this new band, and we didn't want our relationship to be the focus of that work as well. We tried so hard to have this first 2-3 years of trying to introduce ourselves as characters to the company and to the fans. And so we were like, oh, this could be tricky if, this became more important than the children and the brand. And so we're not really those kinds of people either to be so public about certain things. So for us, it was definitely, and because we were already friends, like Lockie was one of the first people I even met at the company. We toured together before we joined the Wiggle Show. So we've known each other for ages. But yes, it was definitely a consideration for us.
I imagine you and Lockie weren't the first intercompany romance. Was there like an HR policy on how to manage it or what the ground rules were? Did you have to declare it?
No, none of that ever happened. But I think that's because it wasn't the focus of our work, or it wasn't the focus of really anything that was going on. It didn't really seem to be a problem for us. And I think when we decided to announce our relationship and especially our engagement, we didn't realize how many people were interested. No, I think it just shocked us. We forget that particularly parents and grandparents are watching us at home with their children every day sometimes. And so even if the children weren't that enamored by the situation, it was just parents that were like, oh, that's right, I've seen the way that you look at each other in this video from 2016. And like, people just, they're so detail oriented, and they watch us, over the decade, and would try and pick out the moment that we knew or that we were together.
Well, on behalf of all the parents who've had to sit through many, many, many Wiggles videos, you have to try to look for some adult frame of reference and an adult subtext.
Some of the banter that happens in the shows, particularly from the OGs, and that's definitely where we have a lot of fun too, as adults, because, the show is obviously primarily for the children, but the fact that we can be impromptu and be really spontaneous on stage actually helps us as performers, and we can see, parents laughing at us, giving each other challenges on stage. That's what is so fun.
I was watching an interview that you and Lockie did around that time on one of the breakfast shows, and you were sitting on the couch and the host was said, so marriage, babies. And I was thinking, as someone with endo, that's a pretty insensitive – I mean, people didn't mean to be insensitive, but that assumption that you'll just be able to have children when you want to, it's pretty full on.
I really struggled with that kind of perception. I mean, I was probably too harsh thinking about it now. I think there wasn't obviously a lot of awareness of endo. So you might be able to say, oh, I've been diagnosed with endo, but lots of people might not even realise that is to do with fertility. That was some of it. The other part of it was also, I found it interesting. I'd announced that I had endo because I wasn't going to be at the shows, and, that felt particularly strange. And I didn't feel that it was appropriate that people would then speculate that I was pregnant, which was like the total opposite of what was going on. Hence why I really wanted to be upfront about my diagnosis. And when I came back, we had this moment in the shows, generally, like when we're on the tour, where we go out into the audience and collect craft from children that have made signs or handmade bows or whatever, which is probably the highlight of the shows. And a mother said to me, oh, when are you due? I got the biggest shock of my life. And at that point I thought, hang on a minute, did she just say that? And then I looked down. I don't know why. Obviously I wasn't pregnant. And I was like, do I look pregnant? And she was like, you're due, right? And I was like, what? And I was like, no, I have endo. I must have just flipped out of character. I was just talking to her, in the audience. Like my microphone wasn't on, but I just got so confused by the question. She's like, oh, I read it in the magazine. I was like, oh, no, I don't think I'm pregnant. But it got to the point where people had gotten so confused that even my mum had texted me and she said, are you pregnant? But no, Mum, obviously I would tell you if that was going to happen.
But there were headlines like, could there be a wiggly baby on the way, all that kind of stuff.
Yes. What colour skivvy was that baby going to be wearing, all these kinds of things. And it was confusing. I think it was only after endo, only after there was a bit more awareness around endo in particular that people were like, oh, right, that means she might not be able to fall pregnant, that people kind of backed off. And less of that has happened since, but essentially the whole conversation in general is a bit insensitive.
It's interesting what you say about how the idea of gender has changed and gender roles has changed since you joined the Wiggles, and now lots of little boys come dressed as Emma to concerts, but also ideas around being more sensitive when it comes to asking women when they're going to have babies.
That's right. I mean, you just don't know what people's situations are. And I think because we tend to experience that so much with children in certain hospitals or at meet and greets, it just would never be a question that I would probably ever ask anyone. And because I was being asked it so often, I was like, do I have a sign on my head? Or, I mean, I don't drink. So I would normally order tea at a restaurant. And every time I would order it, people were like, oh, are you pregnant? No. It just started wearing thin after a while. I was like, honestly, I have a condition. It's called endometriosis. It just made no sense. But, now there is a lot more awareness, and that's been wonderful. for not just myself, but for lots of women who are suffering and might actually be trying to have a baby and it not be so easy, and 300 rounds of IVF and whatsoever. We just don't know.
Just as it must have weighed on your mind as you got into the relationship, it must have weighed even more heavily when you and Lockie called time.
And I think for us, we knew that the most important thing at that point was the group, and it was the children, essentially. We were like, we cannot disappoint these children. That's super important to us, and it's important to the brand. And we knew that we'd be working together post that decision anyway. And it feels, again, quite full circle. Like, we started as best friends and now we're best friends. People underestimate how much time we do spend together. That was a consideration because we knew that, well, it would have to work out anyway because we still will see each other, we'll still be a part of each other's lives. And, this far along down the track, we've realised that the decision was the best for both of us and really everybody at that point, because we cherish each other's friendship and relationship so much that, again, we're the only two that have been through that situation together, growing up and being young performers and being thrown in the deep end and being a wiggle and at that particular time. And we've lived more than a third of our lives together. So that's important to us and still is.
Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin talked about consciously uncoupling. It sounds like that really applied to you guys because you just couldn't let it get messy.
It didn't feel angry, and it wasn't like that. We just realised that we were actually meant to be the best of friends of life. And that, to some extent, was very, very difficult for other people to understand because they just felt that a divorce should always be difficult or messy. And we're like, no, for us it's really different. But even trying to describe that, as an announcement or to the media, that was really hard because people really didn't believe us. They were like, this can't be possible. Anybody that knows us personally, as friends, it's a totally different story. And that's why I guess we still remain the best of friends. And we do talk to each other every day. We have lots of things to talk about. We trust each other's opinions constantly and we know each other so well. I'm grateful to even have a friend like that in my life.
Your new partners must be very understanding of that and must be very secure in their relationships with you both.
I can't speak for Dana. I just love her to pieces. But, both of them, Dana and Ollie are very calm and considerate people. For them to have to deal with us, very enthusiastic, like busy performers, we're very grateful to them, for supporting us in this particular lifestyle. I mean, we're lucky because Ollie's been on the tour before, so he understands, the kind of regime and the pressures and what's important, with the children and being there as a performer. And Dana is with the Australian Ballet, and so she knows about touring. She has children of her own. It's a really different scenario, whereas, I'm sure if this situation was to happen 10 years ago and we were all a lot younger, this probably wouldn't be the case. But, the four of us get on really, really well. And Lockie and Dana's twins just turned 1. So, when you reflect on everything, I feel really proud of the four of us in a way.
Was it hard when he had babies?
No, because it was something that he'd always wanted. We have a friend who, she's like our hairdresser. She's a little bit intuitive, a bit psychic, and she would always say to Lockie, I just see twins, like twins. Wow. She'd always say it. And then when Dana announced they were having twins, she was like, I knew it. I said to Lockie, I'm like, she was on to you. She knew before, like, Dana and Lockie had even met that Lockie would have twins. And yeah, Lulu and Lottie are hilarious. And we see them on FaceTime and we get sent lots of photos, which is actually lovely, particularly now during the pandemic.
When you're on tour, what does a day look like?
It's busy. It's really busy. So I guess I can't say that we're up early because I'm sure radio presenters are up very, very, very early. But for us, we would be having a sound check at around 7 in the morning and then have to get ready for a meet and greet about 8:30. And then we've been doing big meet and greets where we meet over 100 people. So that would take an hour and a half, an hour or so. And then the show would start at 10. And then you really don't stop. It's like show, have a break, show, break, show, break. And then really when we're on the regional shows, we would then be traveling 3 to 4 hours after that to the next town. And that would just go on for 6 days. And then we'd have a day off and a rest day or a travel day to travel a bit further and see if we can cover some more country. It's a lot. It's a whole situation.
And what does Wiggle life look like since the pandemic?
It's been a lot of focus on filming and, really in light of Lockie and Simon having new babies, that's been really good, particularly for them having a bit more time, I can imagine, even though I obviously have no children myself, but thinking about parents at this time. But I'm glad that they've had a bit more time to spend at home and with their families, at this point.
I've heard Anthony say before that he's usually on the road 8 months of the year. Is that right?
Yeah, we're usually trying 8 months, and it's not necessarily in a block like that, but it might be, you go away for 6 weeks and then you'll be back for 4 days and then you'll be back again. So it's always broken up. And when we're in Sydney at any point, we usually try and go into the Wiggly office and film a new TV series or a new video special or promotion videos. And we just try and fill in as much time in Sydney as possible so that we can get all of our content in the can. But now since the pandemic, we've been able to focus on more filming and really think about how we're approaching our audience now that it's all online. And really in the last year and a half, we've done Instagram Live, Facebook Live, YouTube Live. We've really tried to beef up our YouTube channel so that we can have more content readily available for parents at this time, which is helpful.
And now there's 4 new Wiggles. What does that mean to the dynamic of the group and why now?
It's actually wonderful having some extra Wiggles, and really these are our fruit salad Wiggles, and they're starring on a new show called Fruit Salad TV. And so they're here for a special at the minute, but we've been able to, with YouTube, re-release some original footage that we have filmed with other Wiggles in the past. So now our Spanish-speaking Wiggles, all of their content has been made available. We have the Mandarin-speaking Wiggles as well. So it feels like now, after 30 years, instead of content being just available in specific markets, we've now been able to share all of the content and then introduce more Wiggles. And these particular performers of the Fruit Salad TV all have actually performed with us in the past. And so for some of our audience, they might recognize faces, particularly because some performers like Kelly and Sahai have actually performed on our live shows and in videos before. And Kelly, who is the yellow Wiggle in the Fruit Salad Wiggles, she was Dorothy the dinosaur when I first joined the Wiggles, and we actually were roommates. So for us to be together, it just feels like you're having a school reunion. So Kelly and Lockie and I would tour together. So that's nice.
Right. So I misunderstood. I thought it was now there were 8 Wiggles, but you're saying there's 2 groups of 4.
Well, I think we will end up being able to perform in lots of different facets in a way. So we've only done a little bit of filming, and the new Fruit Salad Wiggles have been filming segments for themselves, but actually we appear together and in groups. And, the other day I actually did some media with all the female Wiggles, which was cute. We're like the Spice Girls. And I was like, this is fun.
Yeah. Now there's all these different combinations that you can have.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, I'm pretty excited because we've just finished filming a new Emma series. And so we're about to release a new series on ABC Kids, which is super exciting. And we've managed to film it in the pandemic and record a lot of the music actually at home. We've tried to transform the office into a recording studio and record most of the vocals whilst we haven't been able to travel and have the rest of our cast and crew in one place. Some of the elements on the new series have actually been filmed and recorded at home. It is a slightly different production, but we're looking forward for everybody to see that one.
Is touring going to happen again, do you think?
I hope so. I think eventually it will. And I think it's just going to go alongside, when there's less restrictions. And, for us, international tours super important to the brand as well. So that's not happening, and we just have to wait and see. I guess last year we always thought, okay, well, in 2021, we'll hope for Canada. And then, we get to this point of the year and we're like, wow, none of that ever happened. We've postponed our tour so many times internally. It feels like any time that we can perform, whether it's online or whether it's for one family or on Zoom, it has actually been really special, and it's something that we miss a lot. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to tour again sometime in the near future.
And just finally, how do you live life normally? Do you have to avoid groups of children? Like when you just want to go out and just go to the supermarket, buy tampons, do those things, you don't always want to have the conversations, I imagine. You don't always want to be Emma the Wiggles. So what do you do? How do you go incognito?
Incognito is difficult, but it doesn't seem necessary, mainly because when we meet people, they're actually always excited to meet us. And when it's children, you can't really be upset about that because they are so excited to meet you. But generally the children won't recognise us not dressed in our outfits. It is normally the parents. So yes, if I was purchasing those kinds of items and the mum spoke to me, then it would feel a little bit more appropriate. But the children, if they're a little bit older, maybe 5 or 6, and the parents would say, oh, look, it's Emma Wiggle, and we're not in our costume, they would recognise us. But the young ones, they start looking past me, or they look past the trolley, like they're confused. They're looking for yellow. They're like, why is she not wearing yellow? That's weird. But now, since the pandemic, the only place that we can really go is the dog park. So we've been going to the dog park almost every day, and now all the children of this area are aware that I'm at the dog park with the dogs. No. So much so that these beautiful children, there's like a group of them that have their own pet dogs. One of the girls pretty much announced to the entire dog park that I'd arrived. Everyone, Emma Wiggles here. She's here at the park. And so I don't know, if the announcement was had or not had, I've now realised that everybody knows that I brought the dogs to the dog park. And that's actually nice. There's a community now. Now it feels like, because we haven't been on tour and you're missing all these interactions with children and families, I'm now just making them up at the dog park. So the dog park is a highlight, not just for the dogs.
I forgot to ask you, when you and Lockie divorced, I don't remember you making an announcement to the kids. Did you?
No.
Yeah. How did you manage it with the kids? Or they weren't really aware that you'd got married in the first place?
They had no idea. And most of the time when we would do certain scenarios or stories, like we would do Cinderemma, for example, and I would play Cinderemma, Ella, and Lockie would play the prince. Like, they think that we're dressing up anyway. So even if parents had told them that we were married, I think they just assumed that it was part of a story. It wasn't important. And I guess that's what's interesting about our audience, is that it's two very different audiences. It's the parents / grandparents and the children. So you're catering to two different groups of people, and that's actually a challenge, and it's also really fun. And like you said about the banter at the shows, the adults are so perceptive. They are looking at all sorts of jokes that we're making and funny outfits that we're wearing. So
at my last Wiggles concert, there was a lot of teasing of Jeff because he was about to become eligible for his seniors card.
Oh, yes. See, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. When Anthony approached me about being a Wiggle, you can imagine, you just don't know if they're making a joke or not. And the boys, they love doing that to each other on stage. We might have running jokes for months, and the audience don't know. And it's not a detriment to the show. It's just an internal kind of understanding that, oh, here we go. We're going to make Lockie do a handstand and sing the alphabet song and laugh at him.
The chemistry is just delightful. Emma, thank you. Your puppy dog's been so good since you just wanted to be on your lap the whole time.
I am so sorry.
Oh, no, don't worry about it.
It is the challenge of the pandemic, and also his haircut is the challenge of the pandemic. And
can I see?
I've tried. It's not good. It's really
looks
not
a bit
good.
like my son's hair. He's 13 and just looking a lot like a poodle.
We're all a bit like that at the minute.
Hey, lots of love.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
It was just a delight. I'm just thrilled. And good luck at the dog park.
It is. It's massive.
Thank you for listening to this No Filter. You can head to thewiggles.com to find out more about what Emma does. And if you're feeling overwhelmed by the 24/7 news cycle, Mamamia's podcast, The Quickie, will bring you up to speed daily. It covers the latest news headlines in the first 5 minutes, plus a deep dive into a really fascinating story that's in the news. So you can find out everything you need to know in one go. Such a great way to start your day. It only goes for 15 minutes, and it is my go-to way to get across what's important and what everyone's going to be talking about.
Is there a big risk that South Australia's COVID cases will just explode if they're allowed to welcome New South Wales and Victorian residents for Christmas?
Absolutely. If you've got 80% of 16 plus fully vaccinated, it means there's 20% who aren't, and they're at risk of getting infected, and that's an awful lot of people. In the UK, they're getting 36,000 cases a day. Now, they've got 82% of 16 plus fully vaccinated, which is not too dissimilar to New South Wales.
Check it out wherever you get your podcasts. The assistant producer of No Filter is Lucy Neville, and the executive producer is Liz Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll see you on the Mamamia app.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.